The calendar on the fridge door had a big red circle around April 20th, marking our 10th anniversary. 10 years it felt both like an eternity and just a blank. I wanted to make this one special, a surprise that would sweep Clara off her feet. You see, the past couple of years hadn't been easy on us. Work, life, the usual stuff, but I figured a grand gesture would light that spark again. I had it all planned out: a weekend getaway to the little coastal town where we'd honeymoon, and a romantic dinner at La Bella, the fancy Italian place she always dropped hints about. But good things don't come cheap, so I picked up extra shifts at work. Long hours, but thinking of her smile made it worth it. Meanwhile, Clara, she seemed off, always on her phone, typing away, smiling at texts. I'd ask who it was, and she'd just say, "Oh, just Jen from work," or "It's my sister, nothing important." But something didn't sit right. She'd never been this glued to her phone before. I tried shaking off the feeling, telling myself it was just work stress or something. I remember this one night, 2 weeks before the big day. I got home late, and there she was, sitting on the couch, phone in hand. She jumped when I walked in, like I caught her in the act or something. "Everything okay, hon?" I asked, hanging my jacket. She nodded, too quickly. "Yeah, all good, just reading some news." Her phone, though, was angled away from me. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but that nagging feeling in my gut just wouldn't let up. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My buddy Mike noticed. "You look like hell, man," he said during our break. I shrugged. "Just tired from the extra shifts." "Or something else." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think Clarice, keeping secrets?" I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was crazy, but I couldn't. Instead, I just stared at my coffee, the steam blurring my vision. "I don't know, Mike. I really don't know." Days passed, the red circle on the calendar getting closer. I doubled down on the plans, confirming reservations, booking the hotel. I even found a small jewelry shop for a surprise gift, a delicate necklace I knew she'd love. It was perfect, or so I thought. But as the day drew nearer, so did the distance between us. Clara was there, but not really there. Conversations were short, smiles forced. I tried bridging the gap, asking about her day, her friends, anything to break the ice that had formed between us. Then, the day before our anniversary, it happened. I came home early, planning to start the celebrations with a bang. The house was quiet, too quiet. "Clara?" I called out, dropping my keys on the table. No answer. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, then paused at the bottom of the stairs. I heard her voice, hushed, almost a whisper. "Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow." "Can't wait," she said, her tone light, happy, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. My heart sank. I stood there, frozen, as the pieces fell into place. The secrecy, the phone, the whispers. It was as clear as day, yet as unbelievable as a nightmare. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. Instead, I walked back out, the door closing with a soft click, echoing in the silent house. I needed time to think, to process. But deep down, I knew. The surprise I had planned was nothing compared to the one waiting for me. Hey everyone, quick shout out to all of you watching. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that like button, it really helps us out. And hey, why not subscribe too? That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. It's just a click away, and it means a lot to us. Thanks for the support, and now, let's get back to the fun. You know that gut feeling? The one that tells you something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's been me for weeks now. It all started when I was hunting for Clara's favorite scarf. She's always misplacing it. I wasn't snooping, honest. But there, in her purse, I found a piece of jewelry, a bracelet. Sleek, expensive looking, definitely not for me. I brushed it off at first. Maybe a gift from her sister or a friend, I thought. But then, I found something else, a receipt from Le Jardin, a high-end restaurant downtown. We'd never been there. Too fancy for our simple tastes. The date on the receipt? Last Friday, when she said she was working late. These little things started piling up, nagging at the back of my mind. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation. Clara wouldn't. She couldn't do something like that, right? We had our problems, sure, But who doesn't? I tried focusing on the anniversary plans, but these doubts, they were like a shadow, always there. I needed a sounding board, so I called up my buddy, Mike. We met at the usual spot, a small coffee shop where we'd solve the world's problems over a couple of brews. Mike, I found this in Clara's purse, I said, sliding the receipt across the table. He studied it, his brow furrowed. "In this bracelet thing," I continued. "She's wearing it now. Says her sister gave it to her." Mike leaned back, sipping his coffee. "Look, man, I hate to say it, but it sounds fishy. You sure her sister gave it to her?" I shrugged. "That's what she said." Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Sometimes we see what we want to see, ignore what's right in front of us." I knew he was right, but part of me didn't want to accept it. "I don't know, Mike. Maybe I'm just being paranoid." He shook his head. "Maybe, or maybe you're not looking close enough. You gotta be sure, man, for your own peace of mind." I left the coffee shop with more questions than answers. Mike's words echoed in my head. You gotta be sure. But how? By spying on her? Digging deeper into her things? That wasn't me. I trusted Clara. At least, I wanted to. That night, I lay in bed, watching her sleep. The moonlight cast a soft glow on her face. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Could I really suspect her of betrayal? I turned over, restless, the doubts gnawing at me. The next morning, I decided I'd ask her straight up. No accusations, just a conversation. She'd have an explanation. She had to. After all, we were partners, in thick and thin. Trust was our foundation. Without it, what do we have? But as I sat at the breakfast table, watching her hum to herself, the words wouldn't come. I was afraid of the answer, of what it might mean for us, for our future. So, I stayed quiet, the questions unasked, the doubts festering. It's funny, you spend years building a life with someone, thinking you know them inside out. But then, something small, insignificant even, can send it all spiraling. A receipt, a piece of jewelry, that's all it takes to unravel the truths we hold dear. It was our anniversary day, a day that was supposed to be full of laughter and love. I left work early, buzzing with excitement and a bit of nervous energy. The plan was simple: surprise Clara with a night she wouldn't forget. I had everything ready in my head: her favorite meal, candles, and those little white fairy lights she loved so much. I stopped by the store, picked up some fresh ingredients, and a bouquet of red roses. Cliché. Maybe, but hey, they were her favorite. The house was empty when I got back, which was perfect for what I had in mind. I started with the decorations, stringing up the lights around the living room, setting the table with our best china, and scattering a few rose petals here and there. I was going all in. Cooking was never really my forte, but I had been practicing her favorite dish, chicken parmigiana, for the past week. I must say, it was turning out pretty good. The aroma filled the kitchen, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I imagined her walking in, the look of surprise, maybe even tears of joy. With everything set, I glanced at the clock. It was time to go pick her up from her yoga class. She'd been going to these new evening sessions for the past month. I figured showing up there, roses in hand, would be the cherry on top of the surprise. I got in the car and headed to the yoga studio. My heart was racing, a mix of excitement and a tiny bit of fear, the good kind, when you're about to do something big. But as I pulled up, something fell off. The lights were out, and the place looked closed. I checked the time, thinking maybe I got it wrong. But no, it was right when her class was supposed to end. Confused, I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Maybe she went out with some of the class members? A quick glance around the parking lot, no sign of her car. That's when a cold, sinking feeling started to set in. Where was she? On a whim, I decided to drive by Jenna's Cafe, her regular hangout spot. And there it was, her car, parked right outside. My mind was racing. Why would she be here and not at yoga? I parked a little down the street and walked up, trying to keep a cool head. Peering through the cafe window, my heart dropped. There she was, sitting at a corner table, laughing and chatting. But not with Jenna or any of her usual friends. It was with someone I hadn't seen in years, her ex, Mark. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. There they were, cozy as could be, While I was out playing the fool, setting up a romantic evening, I stood there, frozen, the roses in my hand, suddenly feeling like a ton of bricks. All the doubts, the suspicions, they all came crashing down in that single moment. What was I supposed to do now? Walk in there, confront them, or walk away, pretend like I hadn't seen anything? I was lost, man, completely lost. I must have stood there for an eternity, just watching them, trying to make sense of it all. But in the end, I couldn't do it. I couldn't face them, not yet. I turned away, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. That night was supposed to be about us, our love, our decade together. Instead, I was driving back to an empty house, a bag of uneaten chicken parmigiana on the passenger seat, and a heart full of questions and shattered plans. That Thursday evening was meant to be our big night, our 10th anniversary. I left work early, my head swirling with plans and surprises. First stop, the yoga center, to whisk Clara away. I had this image in my head, her face lighting up seeing me there. Unexpected but welcome. But life, it seems, had other plans. The yoga center was quiet, too quiet. I walked in, and it hit me, no class today. Confused, I called Clara, expecting a quick answer, a reasonable explanation, but her phone just rang and rang, ending up in voicemail. My heart started racing, not with excitement, but a growing unease. On a hunch, I drove to her favorite cafe, Jenna's Brew. And there it was, her car, unmistakable in the dim street light. I parked a little down the street, my mind a whirlpool of thoughts. Maybe she's meeting a friend, I told myself, or grabbing a coffee after missing her class. But deep down, I feared something else. I walked towards the cafe, each step heavier than the last. Through the window, the warm glow of the cafe painted a picture that would stick with me forever. There she was, Clara, her laughter reaching me even through the glass. But she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man, familiar yet unwelcome in our story, her ex, Jack. I stood there, a bystander in my own life, watching them. They were engrossed in conversation, laughing, touching hands across the table. It was a scene straight out of a movie, except this was my life, and the pain was real. Memories flooded back. Jack, the guy she dated before me. I never liked him, and he'd never truly left our orbit. Always a mention here, a casual run in there. But this was a punch in the gut I wasn't prepared for. I should have stormed in, confronted them, demanded answers. But my feet were glued to the pavement, my heart torn between denial and a truth too painful to accept. I was afraid, not of confrontation, but of what it would mean. Admitting this was real, that my Clara, my partner of a decade, could do this. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed irrelevant, watching them. I felt like an outsider, a stranger to her happiness. The woman I knew, loved, and trusted was a mere facade, and I was the last to know. Eventually, they stood up, still laughing, still in their bubble. Watching them walk away together, something inside me snapped. The surprise evening, the gifts, the plans, they all seemed foolish now. I walked back to my car, a void where my heart used to be. I sat there, trying to make sense of it all. The drive home was a blur, the streets empty, mirroring the hollow feeling inside me. That night, our home felt different, colder, emptier. I sat at the dining table, surrounded by the decorations, the unlit candles, the untouched food. The silence was deafening, each tick of the clock a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd just seen. In that moment, everything changed. The trust we built, the love we'd shared, it all crumbled under the weight of betrayal. I sat there, lost in the ruins of a decade, a heart full of questions, and a night that went from celebration to desolation. There I was, standing outside Jenna's Brew, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to turn around, drive away, pretend I'd seen nothing. But the other part, the part that felt cheated and betrayed, it needed answers. So, with shaky legs and a mind swirling with emotions, I pushed open the cafe door. The bell above the door chimed, announcing my entrance. I spotted them in the back, still laughing, still so engrossed in each other. As I walked towards them, The cafe seemed to grow quieter, or maybe it was just the blood roaring in my ears. Clara, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They both turned, and the look on Clara's face, it was like she'd seen a ghost. James, what are you doing here? Her voice trembled, a stark contrast to the laughter I'd just witnessed. I could ask you the same, I said, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. I thought you were at yoga. Jack, her ex, he had this puzzled look, like he was trying to figure out his role in this unexpected drama. Clara glanced at him, then back at me, her face a mix of surprise and something else, guilt. Maybe? James, it's not what it looks like, she started. But her words felt empty, rehearsed. Not what it looks like. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not blind, Clara. I can see perfectly what's going on. She stood up, reaching out to me, but I stepped back. Please, let me explain. It's just coffee, just talking. Just talking, I repeated, my voice rising. You lied about where you were. And with him, of all people. Jack stood up now, his hands raised in a I don't want any trouble gesture. Maybe I should go, he muttered, but I barely heard him. No, stay, I said, my gaze fixed on Clara. I want to hear this explanation. Clara sat down again, her posture deflated. James, I've been feeling so lost, so alone. And Jack, he's just a friend. He's been helping me figure things out. A friend? I echoed, the word bitter in my mouth. And did this friend give you that bracelet too? Her eyes widened, and that's when I knew. All the doubts, the suspicions, they were true. James, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. Sorry. I was struggling to process her words, her confession. You're sorry for what? For lying, for sneaking around, for betraying me? I don't know, she sobbed, her hands covering her face. I don't know. I looked at her, really looked at her. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I'd spent a decade of my life with. This was a stranger, someone who had shattered our vows, our trust. I turned to leave, the weight of her betrayal heavy on my shoulders. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice barely a whisper. As I walked out, the sounds of the cafe resumed, the normalcy of life going on around me. But for me, nothing would ever be the same again. My marriage, my trust, my love, it had all been a lie. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The cafe, once a backdrop to light-hearted chatter and the clinking of coffee cups, had transformed into a stage for my crumbling world. As my voice rose, fueled by betrayal and disbelief, heads turned. I saw the curious glances, the uncomfortable shifting in chairs. I didn't care. My life was unraveling right there, and the audience was the least of my worries. You've been lying to me, Clara. My voice cracked, echoing off the walls. How long? How long has this been going on? She was crying now, her words stumbling over sobs. James, please, let's go home and talk about this. But home was the last place I wanted to be. Home was where I'd planned our anniversary dinner, where I'd hung those fairy lights, thinking they'd shine on a happy evening. Instead, they'd be a mocking reminder of a happiness that never was. Jack, the other man in this tragedy, stood awkwardly. I'll leave you two to talk, he mumbled. But I barely heard him over the storm in my head. No, Jack, stay, I said bitterly. You're as much a part of this as she is. Clara reached for my hand, but I pulled away. How could you do this to us? I asked, my voice a mix of anger and hurt. I'm sorry, James, I never meant to hurt you, she pleaded, her eyes searching mine for something. Forgiveness, understanding. I had none left. The murmur of the cafe had hushed, replaced by an awkward silence. I felt 100 eyes on us, witnessing my life fall apart. But it was her eyes, Clara's, that held me, once full of love, now just full of tears and regret. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of emotions. I can't do this. Not here, not now. Turning on my heel, I left, the sound of her crying behind me. The evening air was a cold slap to my face. I walked to my car, each step heavier than the last. I drove off, the cafe, and its whispers fading in the rearview mirror. I drove aimlessly, streets and lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of confusion and pain. The roads were empty, like the hollow feeling inside me. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, anything, but there was just numbness, a void where my heart used to be. I thought about everything, our first date, our wedding, the lazy Sundays in bed. How do we get here? Where did it all go wrong? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswerable, taunting. I found myself at the park where we used to jog on weekends. I stopped the car and just sat there, staring into the darkness. The park was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. How do you process a betrayal like this? How do you wrap your head around the fact that the person you trusted most in the world could deceive you so completely? I had no answers, just a heartache that seemed to grow with every passing second. The clock on the dashboard told me it was late, but time felt irrelevant. I was lost in a sea of memories, each one a sting, a reminder of what I'd lost, what had been taken from me. Finally, the cold night air and the exhaustion took their toll. I drove back, the streets now familiar, leading me to a home that no longer felt like one. A home where every corner, every picture, every little thing reminded me of her, of us. I parked the car and sat there, the silence deafening. The drive hadn't cleared my thoughts, hadn't eased the pain. It had only deepened the realization that my life, as I knew it, was over. And the hardest part was yet to come, facing the aftermath, picking up the pieces of a shattered trust, a broken heart. The night I walked out of Jenna's brew, my mind was a storm without end. I needed a harbor, any harbor, away from the tempest. That's how I found myself at Mike's doorstep, past midnight, with my life in shambles. Mike, bless him, didn't ask questions. He just opened the door, saw my face, and nodded. We sat in his dimly lit living room, a couple of beers on the table, a silence that spoke volumes. He finally broke it. Want to talk about it? I shook my head. Talking felt like opening a dam I wasn't ready to face. Not yet, I muttered. He nodded, understanding. We spent the night diving into the beers, not much else. Sometimes, you don't need words, just someone to sit with you in the darkness. Morning came.